This event is sponsored by Miro. Miro is the online whiteboard platform where product teams can work together effectively. If you don't know where to start, it's packed with over 50 templates for product teams. Whether you need a Kanban, mind map, retrospective, product roadmap, or user story map, we've got you covered. Try it for free.
Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in. My talk today is about how you can thrive at product management. Most of what I'll run through is very much geared around operating in a large organization, but there's no reason why these practices or habits couldn't help you in an organization of any size. I'd like to start by thanking Product School for inviting me to talk today. It's worth highlighting that nobody is born a great product manager. The way you become one is by growing as an individual to help and support from leaders and peers. As somebody who has grown as a product manager, but also having helped bring people into product management from other disciplines, I think there's a responsibility to help the next generation of product managers by giving them help and advice and support on how to be great at product management. I hope that wherever you are in your journey, that this talk and the great work that Product School are doing helps you to get to where you want to be. I'd like to give a little bit of background on my career. So I've been working in IT and tech for over 16 years now. My career has been spent in working in two large but very different organizations. PricewaterhouseCoopers, or PwC, who are a professional services firm who operate all over the world, and the BBC, or the British Broadcasting Corporation, who are a major media organisation in the UK, but also serve international audiences in a limited capacity. For total clarity, though, I am speaking today in a personal capacity and not as a representative of either organisation. Even though I've been doing roles for most of my career of what you would call product management, it's only been in the last 7 years that I've had an official job title of product manager. But that's partly due to the nascent nature of product manager as a role, particularly in the UK. Right now, my role is as an executive product manager at the BBC, which means that I'm responsible for setting the strategic direction for parts of the BBC's digital estate, but also working with technical teams to implement those strategies. I also directly manage several product managers and business analysts. Within those two very different organisations, I've worked on many different projects, some for internal stakeholders, some for external customers, some which were designed to be used by actuaries and accountants, others which were designed to be used by children trying to pass their exams. Some with only 10 users, some with over 10 million users. What I'd like to share today is some of the most important lessons I've learned about building great products, but also how to stand out in a sea of product managers within a large organization. Within this deck, I've called out a few smaller general tips, which have helped me, but may also help you too. So firstly, one of the best bits of advice I was given early on in my career is the importance of getting your message across clearly, which is even more important as a product manager because you're trying to get people to buy into what you're proposing. So a good framework for constructing presentations or delivering a message to a group of stakeholders is to tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them what you've told them. This gives you clarity about what you're trying to convey and the structure and format around this, but also so you can be confident that you've landed the most important points with the people you want them to walk away with. So on that note, I'm going to follow my own advice by telling you exactly what the main points from the presentation are up front. Some of these might seem like they're really, really obvious, but you'd be surprised how often I don't see them happen. So my key takeaways for thriving as a product manager in a large organization are: know what success is for the project and how to measure it up front. Identify key stakeholders and have a plan to manage them. Be a good storyteller and be able to sell the positive case. And always aim for perfect, not for good enough, not perfect. I'm going to dive into each one of these points in a little bit more detail now. So at the start of any project, you need to gain clarity about what success actually is. This is extremely important because it might not be what you think or expect it to be. Success for a product is often intertwined with the type of product that it actually is. So knowing what you're on as soon as you're working on it is extremely important because it avoids wasted effort for you and your team, but also helps keep your stakeholders on side with what you're trying to achieve. In my experience, the most common types of projects you'll be asked to work on as a product manager are bespoke new developments. So these are completely new, doing something the organization has never done before. This offers you the most freedom to determine the direction, as there's no legacy technology or previous work to unpick, but may form part of a broader strategic initiative you need to align with, so not total freedom. Next is the continuation of bespoke developments that already exist. These are already there. They are some things that you might take responsibility for all or part of within the organization, but it requires an understanding of the work that's gone on and the direction that's been set already. The next type is integrating third-party software or code, which could be anything from a small snippet all the way up to fully formed pieces of software that you need to embed. These projects can be fairly inflexible in what you can do with them, but require creativity and relationship building to get the best out of them. Finally, there are technical or proposition migrations. This is where the proposition might be broadly fine, but you need to move it to a new platform. So you need to focus on what functionality you want to retain, where the MVP lies, and you have to think about what you also might have to lose. What this actually means in practice is that cutting functionality may result in you becoming unpopular or people being unhappy with the decision. But hopefully it's fairly simple and obvious to identify from those broad categories what type of product you're working on. But if it is unclear, the steps that you can take to clarify this, such as talking to your line manager or other senior stakeholders to better understand their expectations. Tread carefully when asking certain stakeholders though, as there may be sensitivities around them for what the project is going to deliver. Once you've identified the type, this then leads you into clarifying what success should be and setting defined objectives. Some of the questions you'll need to ask yourself when doing this include, what is the user behavior you're trying to promote or encourage? If it's a continuation of an existing product or project, what are the objectives that have been set already? Are they correct? Is time a factor? Do you need to deliver by a certain milestone? Or are there external dependencies to consider? Are there penalties or risks that are a consequence of actually not delivering by a certain time frame? Often these things will compete with each other, so you need to establish what is the most important and have a clear linear list of prioritized objectives. Once you've established this and agreed it with your stakeholders, you then need to think about measurement, which leads into the importance of data literacy. Data and literacy of it is crucial in the role of a product manager. It isn't simply enough to hand responsibility for this over to somebody else who might be doing this in a defined role. So you need to be able to understand in practical terms how you will measure performance against your success measures in terms of what data points and what recording you will need to have within your product to validate this. But also an understanding of what that data does and crucially does not tell you. Often we have to use proxy measures to infer the behaviors that we actually want to encourage. In the BBC, we are really interested in knowing whether people have enjoyed the article or the video that they have consumed, but it's almost impossible to actually measure that. Therefore, we have to look at other data points, such as, did they finish the video? Did they reach the bottom of the article? How long did they spend? Did they interact with other functionality? Did they move on to another piece of content? Did they return with a day, a week, etc.? These combined can give you a strong indication of the user intent, but you just need to be aware of the limitations of the measures that you use. It's also important to think about the data in the same way that data scientists would. So identify the variables and constants that could affect the situation you're trying to ensure so you don't get false positives or negatives. I'd always advise casting a critical eye on the data you obtain, particularly if it's too compelling or too easy. There's always risks of recording errors or receiving a very one-sided answer, such as this specific implementation in this specific circumstance has succeeded or failed. Flawed data could lead you down the wrong route. For total clarity, negative results are not the enemy, as they provide you with data you can learn from. It's actually inconclusive results or data that are much more problematic. Once you've identified your project type and you've come up with some objectives or measures, you're going to want to validate any assumptions you might have made along the way. Ideally, you want to prove your hypotheses with real users in real circumstances, as this is the gold standard of data, but this isn't always possible or feasible. Assumptions are risks for your product, and the longer you take to validate them, the more significant the risk becomes. Therefore, to minimize this, you need to validate the assumptions quickly and as early as possible to confirm you're not going down the wrong path. There are many different options you can use to gain confidence, but they come with different levels of data credibility or challenges around how you gather the data. I won't go into these extensively, but options you can consider include A/B or MVT, multivariate testing, which is great for trying out new experimental features with a subset of your audience, but you need to consider how hard it might be to reach statistical significance and the steps you'll need to take to turn what could be a potentially hacky MVT feature into a fully fledged and supported implementation. Fake door tests are also good for indicating audience interest in a particular feature or functionality, but they do risk letting users down as they can feel cheated or deceived when they realize the feature isn't actually there. Bulk research and surveys allow you to gather data from a large group of people, but allow limited flexibility on how you can ask follow-up questions, and people don't always answer survey questions honestly or accurately. User testing is great for deep dives with a smaller number of users, allowing you to follow up with relevant questions, but you're always limited by sample sizes, and lab situations mean that you don't always have answers that are coherent with real life user behaviors, particularly when you're trying to extrapolate that data out of broader assumptions about large groups of people. Another top tip for you. So as you progress through your careers, you'll achieve so much and gain so much experience, making a huge difference to the people and the organizations that you'll work with. Often these things that you will achieve might not be huge and they may not always be positive, but they give you an opportunity to show how you've learned or you've grown. They can be really small tasks, easily overlooked or forgotten, but they're extremely valuable in helping you to get your next role, whether that's using them in an application process or an interview situation. Particularly when you can use them to demonstrate the competencies and skills to be a product manager, which become even more important if you're not doing a product management role now and you're trying to get one. Also, please don't overlook the things you might do outside of work. If you're early on in your career or you're looking for a career change, these might be very helpful and relevant to your situation. I do document all this myself. I recommend this to the people I manage, and I strongly recommend it for you guys too, to keep an ongoing log of your achievements, both big and small, in a single file. So for this, I use Apple Notes to store it because it's handy, because I can easily update it on my phone, particularly if I've come out of a meeting or I'm traveling between locations. So I try to keep it updated as regular as possible, because I think the longer that you leave it, the more likely is you'll miss some of the crucial detail. And I can't overstate how useful this has been for me in the past in trying to actually help secure new jobs. As a product manager in a large organization, it's inevitable you'll have to deal with stakeholders. And not just deal with them, you'll have to be very good at handling them and getting them on side with what you're trying to achieve. A product management role is ultimately a people role, and you'll need to be able to use those skills to better understand your stakeholders. The first and most important step is to identify who they are as early as possible. Timing is extremely important to avoid them feeling like they're an oversight or their needs aren't being considered. Get to know them, find out about what their interest in the product is and any pain points they may have. Try to understand what objectives they have and consider them wisely. Clearly, you'd like to align with their objectives, but avoid anything that could cause you to compromise the integrity of the product. You should focus on trying to establish trust with them so they feel as though they can voice legitimate concerns with you, because they might have been burned by past experiences or conversely have high expectations for the product. Listening to those concerns could save you from making errors, but treat them cautiously if they're simply opinions with little merit. You should seek to set expectations in advance, letting them know the scope of the project early, but also how they can help, provide feedback, and what expectations they should have around communications that they'll receive. Which then leads into stakeholder mapping. When you're working with many different stakeholders, you'll need to know where your effort is best employed and who you need to keep close to the project. You don't want to get sucked into spending all of your time managing stakeholders who are largely unimportant in the broader context. There are a number of different techniques you could use to do this. Personally, I find producing a power interest matrix is the most effective method. This will help you to identify the stakeholders with high power and high influence so you can focus your efforts on them. I recommend actually drawing this out, so taking a piece of paper and plotting your stakeholders on it, which might take a few attempts to get right, but create the first pass of this on your own and then seek to iterate on it with the help of others who are close to the project. It's worth saying that keeping this up to date is actually a really useful activity to do, because the landscape might change over the course of the project and some stakeholders may become more or less important over time. I'd also recommend not sharing the matrix too widely, because it could be considered controversial by some stakeholders because they might not appreciate how they've been classified, or because they don't have a broader view of their role within the organization, because everybody likes to think they're important. So to avoid this, I'd use the matrix as a tool for you and the immediate team working on the product. Once you've formed your stakeholder map, the next step I would recommend is coming up with a clear communications plan. So this will help you to decide how you are going to keep your stakeholders informed and through what means. Some stakeholders you'll want to keep close and have them heavily involved in your decision-making process. So you'll want to consider what forums and how you'll want to engage them and how you'll want to keep them running smoothly. I've found having steering meetings with the most critical important stakeholders can be an effective mechanism, because this allows you to have clear agendas of what will be discussed, including sharing supporting materials in advance to help inform any decisions that are made. Keep to tight agendas and don't take up any more time than you have to, because people are inevitably busy and it sets people's expectations about how things will be run, and they're more likely to be engaged if they think their time isn't going to be wasted. For less critical stakeholders, you may want to consider a more appropriate means that is less time intensive to keep them informed. Email can work really well, but don't use this as a method to drop bad news on a stakeholder, because email is very easily shared and can be taken out of context. People are much more likely to react positively if you take the time to win their trust and explain any decisions or rationale to them. Give them a quick call to talk them through any potential issues to avoid potential flare-ups. Either way though, be open-minded about how you deal with your stakeholders and how you treat them. Their perspectives will help you to create a better product, so listen carefully. Something else that I found has been really helpful over and over again on the products I've worked on, both in PwC and the BBC, is do you find yourself answering the same questions and giving the same presentations over and over again? This is because some of the products or projects you find yourself working on are relevant to a variety of different stakeholders. Therefore, I'd strongly recommend creating some supporting materials which you can use for this purpose, which will help you to achieve some level of consistency in the narrative that you present, but also save you time and effort when dealing with these situations. So one of the things I'd suggest producing is a standard presentation deck. So on the current BBC project that I'm working on, which is creating a BBC-wide topics functionality in a similar vein to what Twitter are doing right now, I essentially have two versions of the same deck, which tell the story of what the product is, what we're doing, what we've achieved so far, and where we're headed. One version is intended for people who have knowledge of the context of the product and how it sits in the broader landscape. The other is for stakeholders who have little to no background knowledge. The messages are essentially the same, but the second deck is more explanatory. But over the last 6 to 8 months, I must have run through those presentations with different groups of stakeholders over 20 times. It's been a massive time saver, but I've been confident that I've delivered consistent messaging to all of those different stakeholder groups. In most organizations, power is divested in a lot of different places. It's rare to see too many specific individuals who have the power to make all of the decisions on their own. So following on from identifying your stakeholders, you need to know how to get them on your side. To build the best products, you need to be able to consult with others for their perspectives and build consensus. This is so important, particularly for your immediate team. I've seen in most circumstances across PwC and the BBC, unless you're very senior, you'll operate in a matrix structure with peers from engineering, UX, marketing, who may be managed elsewhere, and you can't simply tell them what to do or order them about. As a product manager, you'll find yourself being focused on task management rather than line management. So you have the power to set the agenda about what the team will focus on and what will be delivered, but you don't necessarily have the power to order people around and be authoritarian about it. And you probably don't want to do that either, because people won't enjoy working with you. You want people to feel as though they can challenge you on the decisions you've made, and you want them to test your logic, your data, your rationale, so it's as strong as it can be. All this means that you need to be able to win people over and believe in the direction that you're trying to take them in. In my experience as well, I found that the best way to do this is to explain things in a positive manner. What are the reasons why they should do what you've done or you've outlined? Why taking this approach will have the most positive outcomes for the product, users, and the broader organization, rather than focusing on what will be missed or lost by not doing it. And this ties into a little bit as a product manager, you do have to be a little bit of an amateur psychologist. I found that people are more likely to be excited, enthused about the work if they can see the positive difference it's going to make. Negative consequences are unavoidable, but they risk demotivating people. So this shouldn't really be at the core or the heart of your message. That's not to say that you should deceive people about them, but you almost need to think about this, how a salesperson sells their products. They try to get you excited about what it will do, not dwell on what it won't do. It also helps you to think about how your work ties into broader strategic objectives or initiatives for the organization, because it shows you thinking about the bigger picture, which is very helpful when working with senior managers, particularly the ones who are responsible for setting those goals or objectives. They want to be able to see how you are helping them to achieve. So try to paint that picture for them. Also critical to this is that you're building trust with the people that you're working with, which again, I found in practice is achieved by doing and delivering what you say you will. This isn't just the small stuff or the big stuff. It can be anything from sending a quick email or completing a task. But whatever the scale is, missed deadlines and repeated failures will damage your reputation and consequentially will make it harder for you to get business done in future. Again, this ties into the stakeholder management piece, but you need to consider how you can make your message or your objective relevant to the people you're working with. What are they looking to achieve? How can you solve problems or create opportunity for those people? This will help you to get them on side and more interested in the work that you're delivering. Focus on what your product can or could do either now or in the future. That said though, be cautious about how much flexibility you choose to build in. Flexibility of features is great and allows you to come up with creative ways of solving problems with your product, but it is more costly to build this inherent flexibility in. So make sure you're doing it in the right places. It might be worth considering hard coding certain features initially, because that will aid speed to market, and then you can consider making them flexible in future when you can justify the outlay of doing this against your other priorities. So this tip does tie in a little bit with the previous tip that I gave, because having that log of your achievements and experiences will help you do this more easily. But I found that when being interviewed or interviewing others for product roles, a lot of the same questions or the same areas tend to come up, such as showing leadership, relationship management, dealing with difficult people or situations, ambiguity, data analysis or interpretation. Using job descriptions for the specific job you're looking at is brilliant for giving you a clue about the areas you're likely to be questioned on. So based on this, I'd recommend taking a bit of time to match your achievements and experiences to the sort of areas that you think you'll be asked about. This is important because it allows you to use this information and experience in the most effective way, because some things that you've done will be better suited to answering certain types of questions and others less so. And you also don't want to keep using the same examples over and over again, because this looks like you're more limited in experience. Essentially, what this is trying to do is helping you to put the strongest case forward for you getting a role. But one point I would call out though is that when in an interview situation, please don't feel as though you can't take supporting material or notes in there with you. I'm not sure why, but people often feel as though they need to memorize everything. And to be totally clear, an interview is not a test of your memory. I find that people bringing material in and showing you've taken the time to prepare highlights that you have initiative, which is an important skill that's needed as a product manager, but isn't always easy to demonstrate in an interview situation. One of the most common flaws I've seen in product managers within large organizations is that they tend to over-engineer and overscope their products. The MVP is not MVP enough. But this means that you're setting the bar too high, you're adding risk and cost to your product. You should always set your sights on doing just enough, not adding anything more than necessary. Within this context, By ruthless, what I actually mean is being ruthless about your product rather than what people traditionally associate with ruthless, like trampling all over people when they're not expecting it. It's about making the tough decisions that need to be made for the best interest of your product and its users, which these decisions might not make you popular either with colleagues or a minority of your users, but they will keep you focused on achieving your objectives without being diverted or being sentimental about the wrong things. I've experienced this firsthand when working at the BBC, where some very little used features were deprecated on the BBC homepage, which I was the product manager for. A vocal minority complained strongly about this on some of the blog posts I wrote, but ultimately it proved to be the correct decision because we ended up, instead of wasting time replicating those, we performed better against our metrics and our objectives that were assigned. Being ruthless also means being aware of the limitations that your product has. Understanding those strengths and weaknesses in a really clear and articulate way. You need to know them better than anyone else so you can understand how you compare against your competitors. What things do you need to improve upon? What can't your product do? But also be dispassionate and level-headed about your work. You need to prevent the fog of attachment from affecting or compromising your decision-making, because someday your product may no longer be fit for purpose or worth investing in. So you should be the first person to recognize this and already be planning about what to do next. When building great products, speed is everything. You need to validate your assumptions fast and make sure the product is going down the right path. Be like the small child in the back of a car on long journeys that keeps asking, are we there yet? Because it's so easy to get sucked into building a fatter, more feature-rich project, which is easily done in organizations that encourage that behavior. So you need to keep asking yourself of every piece of work, is this truly necessary? Does this contribute to our goals? What would happen if we didn't do it? This is making sure that you're extracting maximum value at every stage of development. Building on this, I'd always recommend starting out from building with real-life use cases, situations where there is a clear and well-understood user need you're trying to satisfy. This ensures that you've got a practical grounding for whatever you're creating, rather than building features and hoping they find a niche amongst your users, which is a very risky approach to take. Another trap to avoid is navel gazing or placing excessive emphasis on fairly small or inconsequential features or problems. This is something that large organizations tend to specialize in, which results in a lot of wasted effort on things that users don't notice or even care about. Finally, remember to be reactive to the environment that your product is operating in. Look for the data that helps you to highlight whether you're moving in the right direction or not. And despite any pressures that you might face from within the organization for doing this, don't try to design every solution or solutionize every outcome up front, because ultimately you don't want to turn your product into a waterfall delivery. Lastly, it's important to make sure that your priorities are focused in the right place as a product manager. Many product managers focus on making big changes or releasing big things, hoping they'll make a big impact. But for me, a great product manager is not one that measures their achievements by what they've built, rather by the difference that they've made to their users and their organization. Personally, for me, one of my career highlights was doubling the click-through rate on the BBC homepage, which was achieved through a very small piece of work to gather better data and insights on how that content was performing. It was such a small piece of work, but the impact was significant, and it changed more broadly how the organization thought about success measurements. Use your creativity and help to solve problems and leverage what's already been built to do the job. So again, another example, while working on the educational product Bite Size, we came under a lot of pressure to make some of the promotional spaces, which were previously hard-coded, configurable, which we as a product team suspected this would have little impact on user behavior. Therefore, we decided to utilize MBT features that we actually had within the site using a WYSIWYG editor to cheaply find out whether that would have an impact or not. So one of our business analysts set this up within an hour, and we were able to quickly demonstrate within a couple of days that ultimately making those things configurable just wasn't worth implementing. So I'm going to stick to the advice that I gave in the first top tip by recapping all of the main points that I've made throughout the deck, which are: know what success for your product is and how to measure it up front. Identify the key stakeholders and have a plan to manage them. Be a good stakeholder, be a good storyteller, and be able to sell the positive case. Always aim for good enough, not perfect. Hopefully, I've managed to explain and convince you why each of these areas are important and how they'll make you a more successful and rounded product manager with any organization, but also crucially, help you stand out from the crowd. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for listening. Hopefully you found this an interesting and helpful talk. I'd be really keen to get any feedback from you about how you found this, so I've embedded a link below in the survey where you can give me your feedback, comments, and observations. If you'd like to chat more, if you have any questions about what I've discussed or product management more generally, please feel free to send me a message or connect with me on LinkedIn. I've included a QR code so you can scan it with your phones, or there's also a link above it. Thanks again and have a great day, everyone.